Black Maid fired for touching the family's piano, but it belonged to her late mother. Eloise only meant to dust the piano. That's all. But when her cloth passed over a carved name, L. Thompson, 1948, she froze. It was her mother's name. Her real name, before life buried it beneath other people's linens and silverware. She hadn't touched a piano in years. But today, her hands moved on their own. One soft note. Then, another. For a moment, she wasn't the maid in someone else's house. She was a daughter again, sitting beside a woman who taught her music before the world took everything. Then, a voice behind her, sharp and cold. What do you think you're doing? Where are you watching from? Backhand index pointing down. Tell me in the comments, and stay with us for the interesting story. The Parker home was the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Polished wood floors, white trim around every door, and artwork that no one ever really looked at. To strangers, it all seemed perfect. But to Eloise, perfection had always been a kind of silence. A carefully arranged silence that hummed beneath the walls, behind the polite smiles, and especially around the help. Eloise had worked for the Parkers for nearly 6 years. She was in her early 60s now, slim, graceful, with streaks of silver in her tightly coiled hair. Her hands bore the quiet marks of decades of labor, knuckles a little swollen, fingernails clipped short, palms rough with honesty. She didn't complain. She showed up, did her work, and left each evening with her head held steady, even when her back ached. The Parkers weren't cruel. Not in the obvious ways. Margaret Parker, the matriarch, was always cordial. She offered Eloise tea on occasion, though never at the same table. Mr. Parker, a retired banker, barely spoke to her unless asking for something to be polished or retrieved. Their teenage son, Andrew, was the only one who sometimes showed her a trace of kindness, a shy smile, or a casual, "Thanks, Miss Eloise," when she folded his laundry just right. Still, Eloise kept her distance. She had learned long ago that in houses like this, familiarity could be dangerous. People said they wanted help they could trust, but the moment you stepped beyond the boundary of your role, a glance too long at a family photo, a pause too thoughtful while dusting a bookshelf, you became visible in the wrong way. And visibility could cost you everything. The piano sat in the parlor room. It wasn't played, not really. Mostly, it was something to show guests, a symbol of culture, of good taste. Occasionally, Margaret would run a finger across it to check for dust, as if its surface was the only thing that mattered. But to Eloise, it was something else entirely. The first time she saw it, something shifted in her chest. She didn't know why. It looked like a standard Baldwin, upright, well-maintained but unremarkable. Still, every time she entered that room, she felt something stir, like a note just out of reach. Then, one afternoon while dusting, she saw it. The carved inscription, barely visible unless you were looking for it. L. Thompson, 1948. Her mother's name. The year she graduated from the music conservatory in Chicago. The year she gave up her dreams so her children could eat. Eloise's breath caught. She stepped back, heart thudding in her chest. It couldn't be, could it? She remembered her mother's piano, rich, dark mahogany with soft edges and a deep, warm tone. They lost it during the eviction in '62. A tax seizure. A city auction. Everything gone in a single afternoon. Could this be that same piano? She didn't touch it again that day. But that night, in the quiet of her apartment, Eloise couldn't sleep. Her fingers tingled. Her mother's face kept appearing in her mind, the way she used to hum while cooking, always in the same key, always with grace. A woman who had poured her soul into music, even when the world refused to listen. The next morning, Eloise returned to the Parker house early. The family was still asleep. She set down her bag and walked straight to the parlor. No one else around. Just her and the piano. Her fingers found the keys like old friends. The first note was shaky. The second clearer. A melody began to emerge, something her mother used to play, a lullaby born in sorrow but lifted by love. Eloise wasn't a concert pianist. But what she had was memory. Heart. Muscle that remembered what her mind had long buried. Then came the voice. Margaret Parker, standing in the doorway. Bathrobe cinched tight, one eyebrow raised. "What do you think you're doing?" Eloise froze. Stood up. "I was just cleaning, ma'am." The keys were dusty. Margaret crossed the room and gently closed the piano lid. The gesture was calm, but final. "That's not part of your duties, Eloise." "No, ma'am. I understand." There was silence. Then Margaret spoke again, softer this time, but not kinder. "I'm afraid this crosses a line. I'll need you to collect your things today." Eloise blinked. For a second, she didn't understand. She hadn't broken anything. She hadn't even played loudly. But in Margaret's eyes, the crime wasn't the music. It was stepping beyond her place. "I didn't mean to offend," Eloise said. Margaret gave a tight smile. "You didn't. But this arrangement no longer feels appropriate." That was it. No shouting. No drama. Just dismissal, like clearing a plate from the table. Eloise left that afternoon with her head high. But inside, something deeper stirred. It wasn't just injustice. It was grief. Not just for herself, but for her mother. For the music silenced long ago. For everything stolen and never returned. That night, she sat on her couch, holding an old photo of her mother seated at a piano, smiling. She turned the photo over. Faint handwriting read, "L. Thompson," for the joy, not the applause. Eloise whispered, "Mama, I think I found your piano." And she knew she couldn't let it end like this. The next morning, Eloise walked to the local library, clutching the only clue she had, the photo of her mother. It was faded and bent at the corners, but her mother's warm smile and elegant posture at the piano had never left her mind. She remembered that day vividly. She had been just 8 years old. Her mother had played that same lullaby, fingers dancing effortlessly, as if her soul lived between the keys. Eloise didn't know where to start, but she knew she couldn't let it go. Not now. She approached the reference desk, her voice steady but low. "I'm looking for auction records. Property seized by the city in 1962. Specifically, musical instruments." The librarian, a gentle older man with wire-framed glasses, gave her a curious look, then nodded. "That might take a bit. Those records are on microfilm." Hours passed. Her eyes strained against the flickering screen, scrolling through line after line of old listings. Then suddenly, there it was. Item number 2213, upright piano. Carved L. Thompson, 1948. Condition, excellent. Claimed by W. Parker. Final bid $37. She sat back, heart pounding. That wasn't just a piano. That was her piano. Her mother's piano. The name, Parker. It wasn't a coincidence. William Parker, Mr. Parker's father, had purchased the piano decades ago. Likely during a tax sale, when her mother had been forced out of their home after falling behind on city payments. A home filled with music and sacrifice, reduced to someone else's family heirloom. The injustice hit her like a wave. All these years, she had served that family with quiet dignity, never knowing that their pride, that beautiful piano in the parlor, had once been her mother's heartbeat. But now she knew. Still, what could she do? She wasn't a lawyer. She didn't have paperwork beyond a microfilm printout. The photo of her mother, the same piano behind her, might help, but was it enough? Eloise considered staying silent, walking away. But then she thought of her mother, who had played concerts in church basements and school recitals, never asking for applause, only space to be heard. Her mama had never been bitter. But she'd always told Eloise one thing: don't let them steal your voice, baby. Not even once. And Eloise felt that voice rising now. So she made a decision. She returned to the Parker home, not as a maid, but as a woman with truth in her hands. Margaret answered the door, surprised. Eloise? I thought. I need a moment, Eloise said softly. Not to work. Just to speak. Margaret hesitated but stepped aside. They sat in the formal living room, the piano quietly standing watch. I don't mean disrespect, Eloise began. But that piano, the one in your parlor, it didn't always belong to this family. Margaret's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Eloise laid the printout on the table. It was seized from my family home in '62. That piano, it was my mother's. She was a musician. A good one. But the city didn't care about music when rent was late. Margaret picked up the paper, reading it slowly. My mother's name is carved into the wood. You can see it if you lift the lid. She played it every day until the day it was taken. That instrument is the last piece of her I have left. Margaret's face turned pale. Are you saying we stole it? I'm saying, it never belonged to you. Not in spirit. And when I touched it, when I played it, I wasn't being careless. I was remembering. There was a long pause. Margaret looked at the paper, then at Eloise, and for the first time, her eyes softened. I didn't know. I believe you, Eloise said gently. But now that you do know, what happens next? Margaret said nothing. Later that night, Eloise returned home, unsure what, if anything, would come of the conversation. She expected silence. Instead, the next day, something else arrived. A call. From Andrew Parker. Miss Eloise? His voice was quiet. Can I see you? My mother. She told me everything. I want to talk. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Andrew looked different, not just older, but more aware. Humbled, maybe. I had no idea about the piano, he said. But I've been thinking. My grandfather took something that didn't belong to us. And we've treated it like a trophy. That's not right. Eloise sipped her tea, watching him carefully. Andrew reached into his bag and pulled out a folded document. My parents agreed to transfer ownership. The piano is yours. We'll arrange for it to be moved. Eloise's breath caught. I also spoke with a friend, Andrew added. He's organizing a local event for Black History Month, honoring forgotten artists and musicians. Would you consider playing something? Maybe one of your mother's songs. She stared at him, unsure whether to cry or laugh. I haven't performed in years. But the music never left you, Andrew said. I heard it that day, the way you played. That wasn't dust. That was soul. Eloise smiled softly, heart full and aching. Maybe the world couldn't undo what had been taken. But sometimes, it listened. Finally, if this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Thumbs up. The old community hall hadn't changed much in 50 years. The wooden floor still creaked in the same spots. The stage lights flickered now and then like they were waking from a long nap. Rows of folding chairs sat waiting, slowly filling with neighbors, former students, retired schoolteachers, and curious teenagers brought by their grandparents. Eloise stood backstage, fingers trembling ever so slightly. The same fingers that had dusted the Parker family shelves, folded laundry, mopped floors. Now they were supposed to make music? In front of people? She hadn't performed publicly since she was a teenager. Back then, she was just Eloise Thompson's daughter, the girl who played by ear. Her mother used to beam from the church pews, mouthing the melodies as if guiding her from the front row. But now her mother was long gone. And Eloise was no girl anymore. She was 62, with aching joints and a heart full of memories. Andrew had kept his word. The piano had been transported gently from the Parker house to the community center. A technician had even tuned it, not that it needed much. The instrument still held the warmth of years past, like it had been waiting all this time to be played right again. Behind the curtain, Eloise sat on a simple folding chair. Her hands rested in her lap, clenching and unclenching slowly. She looked down and saw that she was wearing her mother's bracelet, delicate silver with a chipped charm shaped like a musical note. It had been tucked away in a keepsake box for decades. The event was already in full swing. Speeches, short performances, even a young girl reading poetry about her grandmother's journey from Georgia to Chicago during the Great Migration. Everything was heartfelt, simple, human. Then came the MC's voice. And now, to honor the legacy of black women in music, please welcome Miss Eloise Thompson. The applause began gently, polite, supportive. Eloise walked out slowly. Her shoes clicked softly against the wood. She wore a navy blue blouse, freshly pressed, and her hair was wrapped in a neat bun. Her presence alone stilled the crowd. She moved like someone walking through memory, every step deliberate, as if her mother were in the room. She sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench. Then silence. Eloise looked out at the audience, took a breath, and leaned toward the microphone. "I'm not a concert pianist," she began, voice trembling just enough to feel real. "But this piano belonged to someone who played like every note was a prayer. My mother, Lillian Thompson." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, older folks nodding, some whispering, remembering the name. "She taught me everything without teaching," Eloise continued. "Just by living. She lost this piano, but she never lost her music. And neither will I." And then, she began to play. It wasn't perfect. A few notes hesitated, fingers stiff from years of labor. But the melody, oh, the melody, was pure. A lullaby her mother used to hum in the kitchen. A song stitched from cotton and hope, wrapped in Sunday dresses and sorrow, passed down like a family heirloom. It filled the hall like warm sunlight through a window no one knew was there. And the room fell utterly still. Elders wept quietly. Children leaned forward in their chairs. Even teenagers, usually impatient, held their breath. And halfway through, something unexpected happened. Eloise saw him. In the back row. A man in his 80s. White hair, sharp suit, cane resting at his feet. William Parker. Mr. Parker's father. The man who had purchased her mother's piano at that auction all those years ago. The man who, intentionally or not, had taken a piece of her family's soul and displayed it like a trophy. His hands were folded in his lap. His eyes didn't leave hers. When the final note faded, Eloise stood up. And for a moment, no one moved. Then a slow, respectful applause began, not wild or boisterous, but full of reverence. The kind of clapping reserved for moments that reach the soul. Afterward, Eloise stood near the back of the hall, sipping water, cheeks still warm. She wasn't sure she had the strength for conversation, but people came anyway, one by one. A woman who remembered her mother playing at a church in Bronzeville. A man who said the song reminded him of his late wife. A young girl who asked, "Do you give lessons?" Then came William Parker. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. His expression was unreadable, until he stopped in front of her and removed his hat. "Miss Thompson," he said, voice low. "I need to apologize." Eloise stared at him. "I knew where that piano came from," he admitted. "Not right away. But years later, I put the pieces together. And I didn't say a word. I kept it. Let my son think it was just some family keepsake." Eloise's jaw tightened. She didn't interrupt. "I was a different man then," he said. "Arrogant. Blind to what things meant to others. But today, hearing you play, that wasn't just music. That was history. Living, breathing history." He looked down. "I took something that didn't belong to me. And I'm sorry." The apology didn't erase the past. It didn't bring her mother back or change the years they'd lost. But it was real. And sometimes, even a late truth was better than silence. Eloise nodded, not with forgiveness, not yet, but with acknowledgement. "Thank you for saying it," she said quietly. "My mother always believed people could change." William gave a sad smile. "I hope she was right." Have you ever heard a song that carried your family's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Speech balloon. The days after Eloise's performance felt like walking through a dream she never knew she had permission to dream. It began with a letter. Handwritten, delivered in a simple white envelope. No return address. Inside was a short note. Dear Miss Thompson, your story, and your mother's music, moved more people than you may ever know. Would you consider sharing both with our students? We'd be honored to have you. Dr. Leah Morrison, Director of Arts, Langston Academy for the Arts and Humanities. Eloise held the note like it might float away. She had walked past Langston Academy for years, always admiring the grand entrance and the music echoing through open windows in spring. It had always seemed a world away, reserved for prodigies and patrons. Never maids. But now, they were asking her to teach. Not sweep. Not dust. Teach. Still, her first instinct was to hesitate. What could she offer? Her fingers still fumbled on occasion. Her reading of sheet music was patchy at best. Everything she played came from memory, from feeling. She wasn't polished. She wasn't perfect. But then she remembered what Andrew had said. That wasn't dust. That was soul. And maybe that's what those students needed most. So she accepted the invitation. When she arrived at the school, the young woman who greeted her, a violin instructor, recognized her instantly. Miss Eloise. I was at the community hall. I cried. I think half the room did. Eloise chuckled gently. Well, I hope you saved some tears for your students. I might not go easy on them. They both laughed. Her first class was small. Just 6 students. All gifted. All different. A shy boy who only played when no one watched. A girl whose hands moved like lightning but never smiled. A senior who composed beautiful pieces but didn't believe they were worth anything. Eloise didn't walk in with sheet music or rules. She walked in with stories. With feeling. With her mother's lullabies and the truth that every note mattered, not because it was perfect, but because it came from somewhere real. Play what you felt yesterday, she told them. Not what someone expects today. Over time, those students began to change. Not in ability, they were already talented, but in spirit. They smiled more. They experimented. They dared to play what hurt, what healed, what had no name but sound. Word spread. Within 2 months, Eloise was leading a weekly workshop on musical storytelling. Not theory. Not scales. But soul. Meanwhile, something else was quietly unfolding. The Parker family, particularly Margaret, had begun reaching out, not with grand gestures, but with small acknowledgments. A bouquet of wildflowers arrived on Eloise's doorstep with a note, "Thank you for your grace." Then one afternoon, Eloise received a message from Andrew. "My father wants to meet. Properly this time." They met at the same cafe where Andrew had first given her the piano's transfer papers. But this time, William Parker was already seated when she arrived. His posture was frail, but his eyes were steady. "I've spent the last few weeks talking to lawyers," he began without pleasantries. "And my estate planner." Eloise raised a brow. "I want to create something in your mother's name. A music scholarship. 4 young black students who can't afford lessons or instruments. We'd call it the Lillian Thompson Legacy Fund." Eloise blinked. "Why?" William folded his hands. "Because I owe a debt I can never fully repay. But I can pay forward. And because your mother's story, your story, deserves more than 1 piano and 1 apology." Eloise sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, she nodded. Later that night, she lit a candle in her kitchen and sat by the window. Her home was modest, but quiet and warm. The piano stood against the far wall, not just a piece of furniture now, but a living memory. A presence. She touched one of the keys lightly. The sound rang out, soft and sure. Then she picked up the bracelet from the table and held it to her chest. Her mother's charm. Her mother's note. From that single note, a symphony had grown. A scholarship. A class. A performance. A truth spoken aloud. And she realized something. Her mother's legacy hadn't been erased. It had only been sleeping, waiting for the right hands to wake it up. If this story has touched your heart, please consider subscribing for more heartfelt journeys like Eloise's. Bell.